Do you long for God? King David did. For most of us, having all we need means we have little reason to seek God. But David was a hunted man, chased among the rocks of the desert, a man who knew his only hope was in his God. His writings in the Psalms describe a man who learned to thirst for God like he thirsted for water. Today, a look at the ways God uses to draw us to that kind of thirst. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer takes us to a barren wilderness where David's thirst became acute. Join us in Psalm 42 as we learn all about desiring God.
Back in 1968, I and a number of other students climbed to the top of Masada on what Josephus referred to as the Snake Trail. Masada is a fortress near the Dead Sea. It was actually the winter home of Herod the Great. Had fortifications up there for many, many years, for many, many centuries. Today, tourists go to the top of Masada, being carried, of course, electronically in cable cars. But in those days, the most important way to get to the top was to walk hundreds and perhaps thousands of feet. And it was about 110 degrees, and we had water with us, but soon that ran out. And it was the only time in my life, and the time that I usually refer to when I think of thirst. Sometimes we say that we are thirsty, but have you ever had burning, raging thirst? In fact, days later, I was drinking fruit juice and water to help my body make sure that it regained its fluid and its equilibrium. David said, "As the deer pants after the water brook, so my soul pants after you, O God." And we don't understand that in today's society. What was this guy's problem? Why was he wanting God that badly? Fact is that we are all born thirsty. Physically, we are born thirsty. We come into this world thirsty, wanting to drink. Spiritually, we are also born thirsty. As one scholar says, we have within us a raging, inextinguishable thirst, and we all have it. And we're all seeking to satisfy it somehow, in some way, all the time. But because we're sinners, we satisfy this thirst in the wrong way. These longings, these God-given desires become perverted. For example, God has given us the desire for a relationship. We are born to want to connect with others. That's part of our heritage as human beings. And so what do? We sometimes connect with the wrong people, and we connect in the wrong ways. The desire for intimacy is strong, and so you find those who fall into various forms of sexuality. What they're really doing is they're seeking relationship. They're seeking a God-given desire, but they're doing it in the wrong way. Not only that, but we all seek for meaning. We want to connect with the infinite. Because there's something within us that says that if you want to have meaning, you have to be plugged into what is eternal. And there are many of us who, instead of seeking for meaning, knowing that that meaning can only come in a relationship for God, we are building sandcastles that time is constantly washing away. And at the end of the day, we have nothing to show for it. We all desire emotions. We are born with emotions. With these emotions, we are supposed to love God and others, but we take these emotions and we end up making sure that we love ourselves, and we get it all wrong because we begin to seek inward kind of satisfaction instead of looking to God. Conscience is a gift of God to keep us on the right path, and it is, in effect, standing judgments on all of our actions and saying this is right and this is wrong. But what do we do with conscience? We override our conscience. We learn to manage our sin. We learn to manage our rebellion. And so we do our own thing, conscience or no conscience. What's characteristic of us as human beings, left to ourselves? First of all, is that fulfilling all of these needs are, first of all, they are very self-directed. They are very selfish. Second, we sometimes resort to the passions of the body and give them primacy rather than the intellectual pursuits and the value and the rationality of the soul. The simple fact is that we make a commitment to our emotions and our desires, and then we marshal all of our intellect to justify those desires and to make sure that life comes out the way we want life to be. What we forget is that really what we're seeking for is God. Pascal, you remember the great mathematician and French philosopher, said, "There once was in man a true happiness of which now remains to him only the mark and the empty trace, which in vain he tries to fill from his surroundings, but these are all inadequate, because the infinite abyss," he's talking about our thirst, "the infinite abyss can only be fulfilled by an infinite and immutable object, that is to say, by God alone." And Augustine said in the Confessions, "O God, thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their all in thee." That's why Luther said that it is impossible to sin deliberately unless we first of all think wrongly about God. Because what we are doing is we're saying, I want to fulfill my desires my way in rebellion against God because my way is better than His. And it's this that made George MacDonald say rather boldly. He said, when a man knocks on the door of a brothel, he is actually seeking God. He's seeking God in the wrong place. Now let's look at the text. Psalm 42, David is seeking God as well. David is thirsty, and he's going to God. Why does David go to God? What is it that drove him to the Lord his God? Why was it that he finally came to his senses and said, only God can meet my needs? He says, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? Thirsty for God. What drove David? Well, I think the answer is, first of all, he was pursued by his enemies. He says in verse 3, my tears have been my food day and night, while men say to me,